Clark Howard, he did a program on our air, and he and I became friends, and he actually owned a home up in the Park City area for a while. And I remember one day, I can't even remember how it came up, I mentioned payday lenders to Clark Howard, and I thought he was going to go apoplectic on me. He just almost started foaming at the mouth as he was telling me about the legislation that he had proposed down in Georgia, all of the things that he was trying to do. I was just reminding myself, I did a Google search just a moment ago. I put in Clark Howard payday lending, and it says payday loans hurt finances more than they help. This one, how a $2,500 loan turned into $50,000 in debt. All of these with Clark Howard's byline on them. Payday loans at 4,000% interest, question mark, exclamation point. It goes on and on and on. And, I openly admit, and we haven't really had serious experiences within our family. I've told the story before once when Katie was just a young girl and she was working at Video Verns, and Dee and I think we were down in Eureka for the weekend or something, and she wanted to get her paycheck cashed, and she, had heard all these wonderful advertisements on the stations that she listened to, and they looked so warm and fuzzy and friendly and were open so late. She took her paycheck in there, and what they took out of that pitiful little paycheck to cash it, Katie and I had a big, long talk about that, believe me. And so when it comes to payday lenders, what I'm saying in a really long, roundabout way is I'm not a big fan. Brad Dodd joins us here in studio. And Brad, I know years ago when you decided to try to do something to kind of rein things in, boy, you got the great big bullseye on your back.
Boy, I sure did, Doug. It was a rough time, and they put together a very nasty smear campaign against me and got me ousted from office. But I came back, and here I am again.
And I really appreciate it, too, when you and I chatted when that happened. You said, hey, this was not my opponent involved in this. This was the payday lenders who, regardless of who was running against me, they just targeted me.
That's right.
Yeah, amazing. It kind of reminds me of this situation, where somebody is desperate for money.
I got a nice, easy charter, and I'll pay you back, plus a little extra. I just need a little more time.
Yeah.
Kili Kaliaguga, Wachatabulira, Wonkichisa Crispa Grido.
Yeah.
Java, you're a wonderful human being.
Boy, now I put a target on both of us. It's like Han Solo going to Jabba the Hutt. So anyway, did I set this up appropriately?
Oh, boy. Yeah, that was fantastic.
I think we may both be off the Christmas card list of anybody involved in payday lending. Brad, am I right or am I right? Or do these folks have extraordinary influence in this state, and they're lobbyists? I mean, you look at the best-known names in lobbying, some of the best-connected individuals in powerful positions in the state. It's always amazing how many ties I find to payday lending.
You look at, if you want to go that route, Doug, you look at the highest-paid lobbyists, the ones who, the movers and shakers, and I'm not going to name names. You're more than welcome to. And yeah, almost every one of them has, as a major client, a payday lender, either the industry itself or one of the bigger retail outlets. That is absolutely true.
Yeah. This audit, and I just got a copy of it. I've read the articles surrounding it, but this report to the Utah Legislature, number 2016-04, a performance audit of the Department of Financial Institutions regulation of the payday loan industry. And again, I have not read the minutia. I've got it here in my hand. I just received it within the last 5 or 10 minutes. But the overall impression that I'm getting is that the audit is showing that despite some really good efforts that you and others have made, Paul Ray, others have made, that we're not seeing the fruits of our labor.
That is true. Let me give you just two really quick points, if I could, and I can go on way longer than your audience wants me to. But page 73 shows it kind of ranks the states in how much regulation they put on the industry. Utah is dead last. The only state that has there's one other state that has as few regulations as Utah, and that's South Dakota. Every single other state in the nation have more regulations on payday lending than Utah, except for South Dakota, and that again speaks to the power of the lobbying here, and it's very problematic.
You know, it's hard for me to believe after all of the conversations that you and I have had, after the Secretary of Defense called payday lenders, especially around our military installations, an issue of, not my words, the Secretary of Defense's words, national security. It was a national security risk, is actually how he put it. It's hard to believe we're still dead last because we've had a lot of conversations about this.
You know, we really have, Doug, and what it kind of comes back to, and I'm just going to give you another point here if I could. If you look on page 8, what you'll see is that over half of borrowers, or not over half, but almost half of borrowers are in this category of either chronic users, where they're just using and never get out of debt, or they're just simply defaulting. In other words, only 17% of payday borrowers are actually using the product responsibly. Another 37% are using it, okay, they're getting in trouble, but they're finally getting their way out. But that's only half the users. That's a problem.
Boy, that is a problem. When you look at chronic users at 32% and you look at defaulters at 14%, we're talking 46%. Wow, what? I try to imagine what, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here because I don't want to get too far on the hit list here, but what kind of responsible industry and productive industry and contributing industry in our society could have half of the people that are their customers either chronic, almost enslaved users or flat out defaulting? Who could survive that?
Well, these folks can't. And at some point, they all have to go bankrupt or something has to happen. Something's got to break. And the fact that the industry is allowing this to go on, which is almost a violation, if not a technical, but it should be a violation of state law, what's going on here. But nobody's enforcing it. Nobody's really looked over their shoulder until this audit has come out. This is the first time we've had a genuine look inside the industry of what's going on. And so now we have real data to say, okay, you're not policing yourself.
When we come back, I want to talk about what the future may hold here, how the legislature is likely to respond to this, some of the very influential people that we have been talking about, some of the best lobbyists. You know, and in fairness, these lobbyists, they're kind of like attorneys. They take a list of clients, and it's not necessarily meaning that they are necessarily in agreement, but they agree to represent them. And they have some gifted individuals who are up there lobbying for these industries. What might the future hold? We're going to talk about that and more when we come back with Representative Brad Daw here in studio. We'll talk more about this audit, and we'll talk more about the future and the industry itself on today's Doug Wright Show. Okay, we're talking payday lending, and the reason we're talking payday lending is because of the audit, this report to the Utah State Legislature, which just came out, and I so appreciate Brad Daw joining us. Brad, usually we're talking on the phone line, but I appreciate you being here in studio with us. As far as what the future may hold, and you know, sometimes I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question appropriately. But do we have the appropriate laws in place, in your opinion, and they're just not being enforced? Or do we need to really, really heavy up the law?
I think that if you look at this audit, it recommends several things. And you have to understand when the legislative audit comes out, I can give them a direction, but they are completely independent as to what they do and what recommendations they make. And it's all driven by the data. And they say, first and foremost, without any kind of a centralized database, you don't know what you've got. It took them hundreds of man-hours just to take a small sample of borrowers and come up with this profile. I mean, it's enough of a sample that it's statistically significant. But they say, we need to have a database so we know what's going on. So we need that first and foremost. And then you need appropriate limits in place so that all the payday lenders are playing on the same field. So I'd have to say, no, we don't have sufficient safeguards in place.
And as far as enforcing the law, is there are we slacking there?
Absolutely we are. In fact, again, if you look at the audit, you'll find several cases. I'll give you just one teaser right here, and then as you read the audit, you'll find a bunch more. The legislative auditor found probably 200 some odd cases of violations of law, and DFI, Division of Financial Institutions, responsible for enforcement, has issued a grand total of, count it, 2 fines.
Oh,
And they have kind of a policy in place of kind of giving a 3-year leeway. In other words, if we'll come back in year 1, if you've got a violation, they'll warn you. They'll come back in year 2, hey, you're still in violation. We're going to really come down on you. And then year 3, we might fine you. They've said now, well, we'll go to a 2-year timeout. So they're kind of tightening it in a little bit, but they do not enforce the law as it is written right now.
so there've only been 2 fines?
2 fines. Well, they did a couple more once the audit started coming out, but prior to the audit, a grand total of, count it, 2 fines.
Wow, that is remarkable. I mean, you look at almost any industry, even the most reputable, those that are really working hard, those that are, you look at how many restaurants, will run a little afoul. There'll be something when an inspector comes in or whatever. You look at other industries who maybe there'll be an employee issue, whatever, and there's only been 2 fines?
That's it.
Okay.
And I think those fines were just basically failure to re-register on time. They weren't even they're not even really looking at patterns of abuse, which, state law says you can't have a loan out for more than 70 days. And we found numerous examples of loans that were out for more than 70 days. They get around it by reissuing a loan, which they say starts the clock over. State law is not crystal clear on that, but many people say it does. And so, and they're not even looking at that.
In the article that I was reading on this that led to this conversation, I saw one of the proposals might be to have a cooling off period where you just couldn't roll that loan over. There would have to be a certain period of time. You wonder what effect that would have on the industry, what effect it would have on the chronic users, especially who are, they're just addicted. They are absolutely enslaved by this. They just roll it over all the time.
Absolutely right, Doug. It would have a profound effect on chronic users. The hope is on these normal users or even these low-risk users, it wouldn't have much of an effect. But on the chronic users, it would really go a long ways towards stopping the problem.
I have to admit that, and I mentioned this in the preamble to our conversation, I am hard-pressed to find, I like to think there's good in everything. Mm-hmm. And I suppose maybe there is that opportunity where it's 11 o'clock at night and there's this friendly glow in the strip mall and this friendly place that's open until who knows what time of night when no other financial institution is open. You do not have the wherewithal to do things online, or you don't have a cash card. You can't go to an ATM. I suppose there is a place for the payday lenders, but for it to be in every strip mall, on every corner, I'm trying to understand it, Brad. I really am. And I'm trying to cut what slack I can because some very prominent names in our state are anxiously engaged in this industry. Mm-hmm. People that are highly placed in politics and everything else. And I'm trying to look for the bright side.
Mm-hmm. And I'm with you there, Doug. The fact is we see so much of the chronic abuse. There are people who do use it responsibly. In fact, one of the analogies that was brought out here I thought was pretty clever, and that was a taxi service. Okay, so you're you're somewhere else, you don't have your car, so you use a taxi service. That's fine, even though it's really expensive, right? But, if you're using a taxi service to commute or to go across country, well, obviously that's ridiculous. And that's the analogy here. There is a time and a place where people who may not have a bank account, they're kind of living paycheck to paycheck, they have an emergency, it makes perfect sense for them to use a payday loan. They do fill a niche. They do fulfill a need. And we don't want to ignore that. But what we want to pay attention to is those who keep going back and back and back. That's where we need to draw the line.
And boy, it does sound like, just based on your description, and I think of the description of the Secretary of Defense, of the young men and women who maybe, are just out of high school. Maybe they don't have the best financial education and even advanced education in general. Mm-hmm. Many of them, that's why they join the military. They want to have those opportunities to have this vulnerable part of our society. They are easy prey as well, not only maybe being needful of something like this, but also very, very easy to addict them.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I had a chance one time to go look at my son's email account. I was looking for something in there with his permission. And I went and looked in his spam folder and found a whole raft of ads for loans saying, hey, you're 18 now. You're on your own. You can go do something. And, of course, getting them to get that huge infusion of cash for, whatever it is, cool thing they wanted to get. And it's like, I've taught my son well. Of course, he ignored all of that, but I got to think a lot of them don't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We only have a couple of seconds, Brad. What is the appetite in the legislature to actually do something here?
All I can tell you, Doug, is I'm going to take this data that is now, in my mind, indisputable. I'm going to take it to the leadership, to those in those movers and shakers in the legislature, and says, okay, here's the data. You tell me where you want to go. Now we've got it out there in front of you. It's not me saying it. It's not advocates saying it. It's the data that is from the industry. Now you tell me how we're going to go. And I'll say this. Speaker Hughes, in his inaugural address this year, said we want to let good data drive good decisions. So I'm going to hew to Speaker Hughes's admonition to say, here's good data. Now let's drive a good decision. That's my goal.
Brad, I appreciate your voice in this. I really do. And boy, I'd encourage our KSL listeners to really pay attention to this in the upcoming session. Let your legislator, let your senator, let your representative know that this is of concern to you. Representative Brad Daw has been our guest here at KSL News Radio.